is in look at the Sichas Chelik Tezayin, the second Sicha, the first Sicha I mean for Parsha Pekudei. It's the second Sicha of the project of this what they're learning this week, but it's the first Sicha in Parsha Pekudei. Since this week is Vayakal and Pekudei, we'll be learning Sicha in Pekudei. The Rebbe here speaks about a question which bothers everybody, and the Mefarshim talk about it, but the way the Rebbe has his approach in Pshuta Shel Mikra is interesting. Shengeret Filmol, the Rebbe says, I spoke many times, as Rashi Pirusha ala Teira, that Rashi in his commentary on the Teira, stellt sich op und is mefarish, jeder Inyan welches Feld Bier b'Pshuta Shel Mikra. Rashi talks about and explains everything that's not understood in simple pshat. Und wenn Rashi hat nicht genasbara von Inyan Pshuta Shel Mikra, if Rashi doesn't have an explanation in one thing, a certain thing, schreibt so he writes, Eini Yedea, something like, I don't know. Now, when the Rebbe says these words here, it's not just telling us a fact. The fact is that he answers all the shilas, and what he doesn't know, he writes that, doesn't have what to say, he writes Eini Yedea. This is basically the raya. The fact that in certain places Rashi writes Eini Yedea is a raya that Rashi took upon himself to answer every kasha Pshuta Shel Mikra. Because if Rashi Lechatchila did not take upon himself to answer all the kasha Pshuta Shel Mikra, so if one posik he doesn't have an answer, why does he write Eini Yedea? It's not the only one he doesn't answer, so he has to write I don't know. The fact that he writes on some places I don't know, that means that Be'etzim, every place else, Rashi answers every kasha Pshuta Shel Mikra. And if Rashi doesn't answer, therefore, if there is something that seems to be hard to understand in the simple pshat of the Pesukim, and Rashi doesn't say anything about it, doesn't answer it, so we have to say one of the two. Oder, or according to simple pshat, it's not a question to begin with, so Rashi doesn't have to answer it. Or we should understand the answer to this kasha based on something that Rashi wrote before. And the underline, the stress here is the word shalafona, before, because Rashi will not rely on something that he writes later. Because as we said, Rashi is written in a way that whatever you learned already, you remember. Whatever you're going to learn later, you don't know. So if Rashi would have to rely on something he says later, he would have written it outright here, because he doesn't expect us to remember, because it's written for Ben Chomesh L'Mikra. But anything that Rashi wrote already before, Rashi expects you to remember, and if it's understood based on what he said before, he doesn't have to answer it. So that would be the klal. If Rashi doesn't answer an obvious kasha in Pshuta Shel Mikra, or it's not a kasha, because if you use your seichel with pshat, you'll understand it yourself, or if you remember what Rashi said before, you'll understand it. So that's Hakdama to this week's kasha. In the Itzteke Sedres, in these Sedres, which means we're learning about the Mishkan, which means Trumet, Tetzave, Yaakov Pekudei, is do aninya was is not moving up Pshuta Shel Mikra. There's something that's not understood according to simple pshat. Or Rashi stellt sich nicht auf dem Pirush. In his Rashi, in his commentary, doesn't mention anything about it. Und das ist, and this is the question. In Parsha Vayakel erzählt der Teire, wie Moshe Rabbeinu hat übergegeben zu Eden dem ewigsten Zivui, if Trumas am Mishkan mit aller Protein. In Parsha Vayakel, the Teire says that Moshe Rabbeinu gave over to the Eden Hashem's commandment about giving the donations to the Mishkan, and all the details. Posik says, Chume Yitchem Truma Gamer. Take from them, he told that Eden, that the Abisha said, take from them the donations. Bring in Zov, a Kesev Gamer, from Malachas Mishkan. He says, bring gold, silver, etc., for the making of the Mishkan. Und then noch der Tzivui, if I see a Mishkan v'kelov. And then he says what the Abisha said about making the Mishkan. First about giving the donation. Then he speaks the details of how to make the Mishkan. Und neich l'chol prateim, all the details. Noch dem der Teire, then the Teire tells us, the Eden am gebracht in the Dove from Malachas Mishkan. Had Eden brought their nedoves, their donations to make the Mishkan. Und noch wird erzählt, Proteus, and then it's written in detail, wie die Chachma Leib haben gemacht the Mishkan, how these Chachomim, these experts, made the Mishkan, the Yerias, the cover of the Mishkan, alle Klei Mishkan, and all the vessels of Mishkan. Parsha Seinu, and in Parsha Pekudei, it also talks about the big Dekona. So Vayakov, he says how they made the Mishkan, all the details, and in Parsha Pekudei, how they made the big Dekona. But at first glance, in Pshuta Shel Mikra, simple pshat, it would have been enough, and the Teire zog bekitzer. Teire was written very simple, very short. As Meisher Tiber gegeben zu Eden, dem ganzen Zivui von Eberschen auf Nidvas Vasis Amishkan. Just to say very clear, very simple. Meisher Rabbeinu gave over to the Eden what Hashem said to him concerning the novice, the nations are making the Mishkan. Pasere Protim, seine Do ausführlich in dem Zivil von dem Eberschen zum Menschen, mit Pasha Trumat Tzavik Sisa. In the previous parshas, Trumat Tzavik Sisa says clearly, very detailed, everything what they have to do concerning the donations, concerning how to make a Mishkan, how they're supposed to be made, how the size, and how, very detailed in the parshas, Trumat Tzavik Sisa, where there it tells us how the Ebershter told Moshe Rabbeinu how to make the donations, how to make the Mishkan. So all it should have said, we know already every detail of the Mishkan. So it should have said only one thing, that the Moshe Rabbeinu gave over to the Eden what he was told. And then it should say, and the Eden did what Moshe said. We'll know what they did if we learned already what Hashem said, what the details are. And it'll say, and the Eden did it. We know exactly what they did. Or the Noch Mebekitzer could be even shorter. After it says what Hashem told Moshe, so Stein, it should have said one line. The Eden did whatever Hashem told Moshe to do. We find it a lot of places in the Torah. In these Seder's Gufe. In these Seder's Gufe, sometimes the Torah says, and the Eden did what Eibusher told Moshe. So was darf die alle Protim noch einmal durchgerechnet werden, sei bei den übergebenden Zivil to the Eden, sei beim Ausführen dem Zivil Befehl. Why does that have to be repeated a few times? First, it's repeated when Moshe Rabbeinu told the Eden what to do. He told him, they told me to make this, to make this, to make this, and this. And then it says exactly how they did it. So it's 3 times. First time it says the Eibusher told Moshe what to do. Fine. After it says what to do. So one way of the kasha is it could have said that Moshe Rabbeinu told him, and then it should have said that they did it. But Emes Rebbe says it didn't even have to say that Moshe told him. After it says what the Eibusher said, all it has to say is, first it says the Eibusher told him what to do. Doesn't even have to say Moshe told the Yidden. Then it says, and the Yidden did like Moshe was told by the Eibusher. Doesn't even have to say that. So we could go straight from Hashem's telling him, and then right away it doesn't have to say that Moshe Rabbeinu told him. Because we know in many places like that, we find in the Torah that the Eibusher told Moshe, and it says what the Eibusher said, and it doesn't even say that Moshe told it to the Eden. And it's self-understood that he told it. So here also, if it says that Hashem told Moshe, that's it. Then and the Eden did it. Why does it have to go to Daricha? So Befrat is an only Parshas Vayakel, Rashi, especially that Rashi himself in the beginning of Vayakel, where there the Torah repeats all the things that Hashem told Moshe concerning the Mishkan and the Kelim. So Rashi says, and that I already explained the donations of the Mishkan and how they made the Mishkan in the place where they were told. In Parsha Truma Tetzaveh, Kisisa, there Rashi explains every detail of the Orin and of the Meneda, of every detail of everything. So Rashi doesn't have to repeat his Pshat. So in Parsha Vayakis, I'm not going to repeat my Pshat. But does Zoktoch Eich, this tells us also, as in the Parsha, is in the talking Chiddush of the Friedrich Parsha. So that tells us that there's nothing new here. Und der Rebbe hat etwas zu geben bei Pirusha da. That's what Rashi has nothing to add. If there would be any additional things here, Rashi would speak about it. When Rashi says, I have no reason to repeat it, means there's nothing new here. Wer doch noch starker dit mir, so the question is even stronger. Ey, bazei, wollte doch die Teira Avade nicht gedacht, durchzurechnen in Yonim a zweiten Mal und a dritten Mal. If Rashi feels that he doesn't have to repeat it, the Teira itself, every word in the Teira is so exact and there's not one extra word. So if Rashi feels there's no need to repeat Pshat, so the Teira certainly shouldn't have repeated. A second time and a third time. Okay, really, the first time when Hashem said to Moshe, it says all the details. Then when Moshe told Eden, it also told them a lot of details, but not exactly everything how to make. But then the Torah repeats how they did it. It's exactly all the details. So it's basically 3 times, 2 times mainly, and also a third time. So the question is, why did they have to repeat it? Then he says, Ha'omer is Ashayla Pshuta Pshuta Shamika. What we just said is a very simple question, a simple pshat. Many Meforshim talk about it. Und in Rashi, gefindet nicht kein Asbar of them. In Rashi, we don't find an explanation. Nicht betchilas in the Parsha Vayakel, not in the beginning of Vayakel, which is the beginning of the Inyan. Und nicht besiyam in the Nunter, not at the end, which is in Parsha Pekudei. Rashi doesn't say it. And the question is, why doesn't Rashi explain it? Well, befrat as Nifne in Parsha Sisa, especially that earlier we find the Parsha Kisisa. Stellt sich Rashi auf zu bewahren in die Überchazerung von Bleis gezählte Wörter. There the Torah repeats a few words, just a few words. And Rashi makes a mention of answering why the Torah repeats it. Das was in the Torah steht drei Mole Sebastian di Bachalevime. Rashi explains why in the Torah it says 3 times the words Loi Sebastian di Bachalevime, which means don't cook a goat in the mother's milk, which means the Isser of Basar Bachala, a milk of meat. And the Torah says it 3 times, and it's 4 words. Loi Sebastian di Bachalevime, 5 words. And Rashi wonders why the Torah repeats it. So there, Rashi is bothered, and Rashi explains why the Torah repeats it. But Eis does, and in Arichas Dikach Polis from ganze Parshas, here, the Torah repeats whole Parshas. When Rashi is regarding the Mefarish, and Rashi doesn't explain anything. And then in Orah 16, the Rebbe mentions that we find a similar question. In Parshas Nosei, where the Torah tells us the Karbonas that the Nesiim brought the first 12 days after they put up the Mishkan permanently, it's exact same Karbonas, and the Torah goes through every detail. So we have the same question there. So Mefarshim explained, but the Rebbe explained it already in Chelik Ches. The Rebbe brings here that Rashi answers this kasha. Basically, the Pekudei is that each one had a different kavanah, that they brought the same physical karbonas, but there was another meaning behind it. So Rashi explains it there. And here, Rashi doesn't explain anything. The Churabot gekent sagen, as a kalponim achelik from the shaila wird verantwortet al pipirish Rashi in unser Parsha. Maybe you can answer that part of the question is answered based on something else that Rashi wrote in Parsha Pekudei. What does Rashi write? Even posik ubetzalo benuri begame it. Also, as kol hashetziv Hashem esmeish. And the posik where it says that Betzalo Benuri did everything that Hashem told Moshe. It's a medayik in the word. Zokt Rashi. Rashi says, as Moshe tzivad Betzalo lases kelim tchila v'chakach mishkan. Moshe told the Eden, told Betzalo, I mean, to make first the kelim, the vessels, and then to make the building, the Mishkan. Omar Betzalo said to him, Mina ga'ilim lases tchila ba'is v'chakach mesim kelim b'teiche. The way things work in the world, first you make the house, and then you put the furniture in, then you put the kelim in. Omar so Moshe answered him, you're right. It's exactly, I heard from the Eibush that the way you're telling me. He did that. First he made the Mishkan, then he made the Kelim. So that's what Rashi says. But we can't answer, so we could have answered based on this Rashi, the question, part of the question we asked before. This is the reason why later the Torah says when they made the Mishkan and the Kelim, the Mishkan goes through all the details again, which is part of the question we said before. So you could say, Dafke, durch dem, Zetman, Bibitzalot, Mahapach, when we say that. Dafke, then, if we see the details, everything separately, then we see how the Seder is. That the way it was made, first they made the Mishkan, and then they made the Kelim. From the Meifem is ausgestellt, like in Sivim Pasha Truma, that he changed the Seder from the way it's written in Truma, where the Eibishter told him, und gemacht früher the Mishkan, then not the Kelim. First they made the Mishkan, and then he made the Kelim. So, the reason the Torah repeats it, to stress this point, that he did different than it says in Truma, because really this is what David wanted, this is what David said. So, you could answer, that's what the Torah repeats the whole thing. But the Rebbe says, first of all, according to this, he still don't answer for was the Torah da fuisrechen die Protein beim Sipur v'meishet ibri din dem tzivu yavnitis amishkon et asiyas amishkon v'kela. In other words, we said before, the question is, why did Moshe Rabbeinu tell the Yidden the details of the Mishkan and the Kelim, and then the Torah, and that why it should have said he just told him what the Eibush told him, and later when they made it. So this answer that the reason the Torah writes the way they made it to tell you the order that Betzalel made it. It's only for that part, the part where the Torah tells us that Betzalel made. But it doesn't answer why when Moshe Rabbeinu told the Yidden what to do, why that he repeated. So besides that, it doesn't really answer the whole arichas of when they made the kelim. Even though the Torah might want to tell us that he made it in such a way that first they made the Mishkan, then the kelim, but that's not a reason why it goes into such details. Because number one, to the them, if just to tell us that the order was different than the way it says in Truma Tetzaveh, in Truma, so the them is genug der Chelik HaSipur b'Torah. This would be enough if the Torah would just tell us, or that zählt man hat zum ersten gemacht the Mishkan, dann noch hat man gemacht the Kelim. Would have been enough, yeah. If he wants to tell us like how they made it in the different order, it should have said they made the Mishkan and then the Kelim. But the Sipur wegen der Asiyas HaKelim, but to tell us about in each Kelim Gufa how they made it. And certainly the way they made the garments of the Kohanim, which is in Parshas Pekudei. That wasn't changed by Betzalel. Betzalel changed the order of the Mishkan and the Kelim. Moshe told him first to make the Kelim, then the Mishkan, he changed. But within each Kela Gufa, he didn't change anything. So the Torah just would have told us the order that they made it. But why does he have to go through the details of the Kela? This Kela was in this size, and this Kela was this, and gold, and this, and why is that important? That doesn't have anything to do with what Betzalel did. And also not benegate the Big Tikkun. The Big Tikkun is not part of the problem. The whole problem was, should you make the Mishkan first and then the Kelim, or the Kelim first and then the Mishkan? And he changed from what Moshe told him. But it has nothing to do with the Big Tikkun. So how could you say that this is the answer? It only answers a little bit. The chlol is why it says that they made the Mishkan, then why he made the Mishkan the Kelim, but not the details. Number two, the Ikeh, the main thing is, in order to tell us how the order was, freer from the Mishkan, they know the Kelim, first they made the Mishkan, the building, and then the vessels, is nicht neitig, the Arichas, when they brought the Advorim and the Rasiya Zeirmos. So you don't need the importance of the details that's there. So this is like not the same kasha as before. The kasha he has before is that why would he tell us the order of how he made the kelim? Not see before I didn't stress, I mixed what it says here too. But before the kasha was the order of the Mishkan first and then the kelim, and he did Haket. And before Moshe was told, Moshe told him the kelim and then the Mishkan. So the Rebbe says for that you have to talk about the kelim and the Mishkan. But in the kelim gufa, which one came first? That's not negayah. In the big tikkun, not. Now the Rebbe says another prat. The details of how they made it, not only who came first, how they made the order. Let's say, why is that important to the singing of Moshe and Betzalel? Noch the akpolos aprotim now. Also, after he repeats it, when it's come to Parshas Mishkan in Parshas Pekudei, it says they brought the Mishkan when it was finished. They brought it to Moshe. So Rechem to is the Torah, it's the third kasha. Rechem to is the Torah wieder amol. Then the Torah again repeats all the prote advorim from Mishkan v'Kelim, all the details. So there you can't answer this answer that he gave before. He wants to tell us the order how it was made, because there he's just telling you what they brought to Moshe. They brought the Mishkan and they brought the order and they brought this, they brought that. All that. Why does the Torah have to say that? A fourth kasha. Nordem is the posik Esh Messiah, and then the posik finishes off. Everything that Hashem said to Moshe, commanded Moshe, that's how the Yidden did the whole job. So we see that the Torah even mentions that. Perhaps the Torah could have written just that last posik, and that's it. It would have been avoiding everything. It wouldn't need everything. That makes us that the kasha even stronger. So the answer is like this. The Rebbe says it's very poshut. The Mishkan v'Kelim is from the Nyonim achi ikrim v'chavivim by Yidden. Mishkan and Kelim is from the most important and most beloved things by Yidden, because durch them we given Ashras Hashchina by Yidden. That's the place where the Shchina rested by Yidden. Ubifrat, especially, at the Mishkan wird angerufen, wie Pirish Rashi and Parashashen, the Mishkan Eidus. The Mishkan is called Mishkan Eidus. And Rashi says, why is it called Mishkan Eidus? Because Eidus means testimony. Eidus LiYisrael, the Mishkan was a testimony to the Yidden, Sheviter LeMakadosh Baruch Al Ma'aseh Egel. Hashem forgave them for the Egel. How did he show it? By telling him to make a Mishkan. And and he rested his Shechina in it. If David would be angry at the Yidden, he wouldn't do that. So the fact that he told him to make a Mishkan, the Shechina rested, that shows that David forgave him for the Egel. So you could imagine how important that is, how beloved it is by the Yidden. And the Rebbe in Order 26 says that, especially according to Rashi, when did the Eibush tell Moshe, even start telling him to tell the Yidden to make a Mishkan, was after the Egel, after Yom Kippur, David forgave. That means the whole thing of the Mishkan started when they did the Egel, and David forgave him, and then he said, as a result of the forgiveness, he told him to make a Mishkan. See, there are other opinions that hold that there are two other opinions, Betzim. One opinion is that the Eibush told him about the Mishkan much before the Egel. And they made them, and Moshe came down, and they made the Mishkan. They were working on the Mishkan before the Egel. A third opinion is the Eibush told Moshe to make the Mishkan before the Egel, but Lapel, when he came down and they did it, was after the Egel. But Rashi learns that the whole thing started after the Egel, after Yom Kippur, after the Eibush forgave them. So B'meila, the whole Mishkan is a result of Hashem's forgiveness. So it's very important by the Yidden. But the food is noch mehr moving the chvivis uninyan akolish. Now that we're saying that the Mishkan represents the forgiveness on the Egel, shows even more how Eden, the beloved by the Eden, how important it's a general inyan. From Chet Egel, the Chet Achli Godel Kloli. Chet Egel, Aveda of the Egel was the biggest Aveda, most general Aveda. Was a Gatem given some gresten Hester Pony from the Mevish. This caused the greatest concealment of Hashem. These to the Gzeira Kloi Rachman Mafanafin. There was a Gzeira decreed to kill all the Eden. These are feel noch der Slicha, because the truth is, even after the Eibishter forgave them, had the Eibishter gesagt to be impossible pekadet. I forgive him now, true, but I will remember it every time there will be any other Avera. I will punish them, and I'll add the punishment for the Egel. So we see how terrible the Egel was. Und der Fund is movement. So now from that we understand, from knowing how terrible it is, we know the other side. That the Mishkan that brought the Eibishter to rest the Shechina amongst the Eden. Is Ayin Kloliv and Nailad mate, it's the greatest inyan. To have the Eibishter concealed is the worst. To have the Eibishter revealed and come down is the best, the most important thing. Meili is verstandig. Oh, Meili, we understand. Also, die Grace Chvivis from the Mishkan beim Eibishter bei Yidden. This great love that the Eibishter has them to the Mishkan, the Yidden have to the Mishkan. Das is the time of the Teire rechen tu is alle prota Mishkan. This is the reason why the Teire repeats, mentions all the details of the Mishkan. Und chazet ze iber einmal und noch einmal chulu. And repeats them once and twice and again and a few times. So it's all mit alla protim and all the details. Because since the Eibishter loves it so much, so he repeats it and says it again and says it again and says it again. But the question is, why doesn't Rasha say it? Good, it's an answer. But we said before, Rasha writes all the answers to all the questions in Pshat. Well, this is a good answer. Why doesn't Rasha write it? What did we say the second choice? That sometimes Rasha doesn't write the answer because it's understood based on what Rashi wrote before. Und der Tam darf Rashi nicht befahrisch. Rashi does not explain it. Rashi already wrote in Parsha Chaisora that something that's beloved, you repeat. Where do we see it? Then was know them the Torah that zählt wegen allem Heroes von Eliezer Eved Avrom. After the Torah tells us everything that happened to Eliezer, the servant of Avrom, B'shayches and came bring Rivke when he went to Choron to bring Rivke. Torah tells us everything that happened. He came to the well, and then he made himself a simon. He's going to ask the girl to give him water, and if she'll say the Gemalim, all things Torah says. What happened later? Chazet say the Torah Iber Nochamo. Torah repeats all the details again. He's in the Erzählnis from Mishpachas Rivke. That when he came to the family of Rivke, he told them the whole story. So the Torah doesn't just say, and Eliezer told him everything that happened. And we'll understand. We'll look back what happened. We know what happened. Torah tells exactly again what he told him. This, and I came here and I said this and I did this to preach. Why? Is Rasha Masbir. Rasha says that this is mitzad chvivis from the minyan. Because this is such a beloved inyan, David the Torah repeats it. Varum, and then Rasha brings this. Omer Rabacha. Rabacha said, Yofes yichosen shalab, the obvious lifnei amokim mit erosen shalbonim. That the talk, the simple talk of the avodim, of the obvious, which is Eliezer, is more beloved is more beloved than the Torah of the children of the Eden. Where do we see it? The Parsha of Eliezer, which is only a story that he was telling, the Torah repeats. And a lot of Poshet main halachas in Torah was only hinted through a vov, through a letter here, through an extra word here, is hinted. So we see. So the Rabbi said that the words of the Avdei Ovis, the Sicha of the Avdei Ovis, which is not Torah, not the Torah, what the Rebbe will explain means halachas to tell you what to do. The Torah repeats it because the Eibishter loves that more than the Torah of the Yidden. Basement der Fund, from here we know, as an Inyan was is Choviv an Eibishter, something that's loved by Hashem, is the Torah das Keifel mit alle Protim. That the Torah repeats it with all the details. Hagam es kumen nitzuk and chadushim in them. Even if there's nothing new. Because sometimes we have the Torah repeat something, and the second time it adds a certain detail, which is also a question. You could have said that detail before, but whatever it is, but at least we see a reason why it repeats. But here there's no reason, there's nothing new. Now, same thing here. That because the Mishkan is so beloved, the Eibishter repeats it once and twice and again and mentions many times as he can, because it's something beloved. Like Rav Acha said, Yofes Yichoshin Shlav Te'ovis, the Sicha, the words of Avdei is nicer, is more beloved by the Eibishter than the Torah of the Bone. However, the Rebbe says this is not so simple. You have to understand it. Von dem Pirish Rashi is Lachura Muchach Parket. The Rashi that we brought, you might say, is not a raya to what we said, it's a contradiction. What did Rasha say? That the sicha, the stam speech of the avodim of the Ovis, Eliezer, which is the Eved of Abraham, is nicer, better, or more important, or more beloved, from the Torah of the children. What does Rasha mean? Meintoch kipshute, it seems simple pshat, as by Teirasa Shalboni was noch matan Teire, that by the Teire of the children, which means the Teire of the Yidden, the children of the Ovis, that came when the Teire was given after matan Teire, gefind man nit as achvives. Seems from Rasha that we only find such a thing, such a chvives, to repeat things by the avodim of the Ovis. But we don't find it by Teire. What so the demzel by Zeizain, the Rinya from Kfula B'Teire, wie by Sichos Shalab the Ovis. What you're saying is by Avdei Ovis we find it, but we don't find it in the Torah. So Rashi is telling us that in Torah we don't find that Torah should repeat something because the Eibishter loved it. Kemedach nit zogen na dem Hezber by Asiyas HaMishkan was is Teirasa Shel Bonim. So we can't say that concerning the Mishkan. We said that just like over there, the Torah repeats it because he loves it. The same thing here, but there Gufet says where did the Torah show he loves it? By the avodim of the Ovis, but not by the Torah of the Bonim. And now we're trying to use that to say that by the Torah here, which is the Mishkan, which is part of Torah, the Torah repeats it. We're saying because of the Chvivas. There it says that it's only by the Avdei Ovis is greater than the Torah. So it shouldn't find by the Torah. So obviously this is not the reason. Because if this will be the reason, that means we find it by the Torah also of the Bonim. So the beer and them, the answer is like this. The Kavana for the Maimer was Rasha brings, the meaning of this statement that Rasha brings, of Rabache, that the sicha, the speech, the word, the talk, I don't want to use the word idle talk, but talk of the avodim of Dovis is nicer, greater than the Rosh Bonim, is nicht so madgish in the Yisrael von Avdei Ovis Bonim. It's not like we thought before that he's trying to say, look how great the avodim of the Ovis were. They're greater than the Torah of the children. That even their sicha was repeated. And that's something special about the Avdei Ovis, greater than the Bonim. That's not what Rasha means. The stress is not Avdei Ovis versus Bonim. The stress is Sicha versus Torah. That's what it means. That a Sicha, even from the Avodim of the Ovis, not that Ovis are greater. Ovis is the Avodim of the, it's not Ovis, Avodim are greater. Verkehrt, the Indian of Avodim is a Chesorin. But he says, Afile Avodim. Sometimes we find that Sicha, something that you say, even though it's not Torah, should be greater than Torah. And the Torah will repeat it. So what he's trying to say is that not that we're making a chesorin and something less than Torah. So this is what he means. The chiluk zwischen zwei Pshute is, the difference is like this. Torah meint heroes, sivuyim, the dinim, lessons, commandments, dinim, what the Rabbi hat angesagt, was wie zu tun. The Rabbi said what to do and how to do it. Sicha meint, what does Sicha mean? A dibur was begoli b'pshut. He says, "Nit consider something that you talk, which begoli, and in simple pshat, it's not a lesson. It's not a tzivui." Now the Rebbe says begoli here because in order 32 he says everything in Torah is a lesson, but that's a primisdik pshat. But in a simple pshat, we know there are certain things which is stories in the Torah, and certain things is Torah hero lessons. About it, like I said, it says in Zayar that someone says that the Torah is a storybook, is the terrible things. But we're talking the Pshutta Shel Mikra. Pshutta Shel Mikra, certain things are stories, certain things are Tziva Hero. So, Sicha is a speaking, which is not a Tziva Hero, nor a Sipur, but is Matayra Matzav. It's a story that tells us a situation. A Pasibing, something that happened. A Pula, something that was done. That's what Dibur is. That's what Sicha is. So you have Torah and you have Sicha. Wie das ist bei Eliezer Eved Avrom, like it was by Eliezer Eved Avrom. When he came to Rivka's family, what did he do? Was hat erzählt wegen Avrom und Yitzchok und was mit ihm hat getroffen? He was telling him. Who Avrom is, Yitzchok is, what happened to him? Die Kvitz Haderech, how he had Kvitz Haderech, he went fast. Der said der Eibishter the Masmen given Rivka, and the Eibishter made that he should find Rivka, etc. So that is the union of Sicha. Is there Maimer Madgish? This Maimer, the statement of Reb Ache, that Sicha of Avdei Ovis is nicer, more choviv than the Torah of Boni means. At the Sicha, Afila from Avdei Ovis, not that Avdei Ovis is special. Forget Avdi Ovis is a lower madrege than Eden. But even Avdi Ovis, sometimes you could have a sicha, which means it's not talk of a hero. It's a story, just repeating a story. Is lepoomim yofa from terosei filishabonim. Is sometimes better even than the Torah doing. So the bonim are greater than the Avdi Ovis. That's for sure. The bonim are greater than the avodim. But he's saying the mile of sicha. Sometimes there's a sicha, a certain type of talk, which is not hero, and it should be more chaviv than the hero in Torah. And that, it says, even by Avdi Ovis, even if it happens to be a sicha of a lower caliber of Avdi Ovis, sometimes the sicha is greater than Torah, even if the Torah is from the bonim. But bizes verstandig eich in the parsha shavonenu. So by us in our parshas, we're talking about. No, they said this Trumat Tzav after Trumat Tzav, when the Torah repeats all the details again in parshas Vayakal Pekudei in all the cases. Now we'll understand. Say community begeben Tzavuim veiroes wie in Vosaton. In Vayakal and Pekudei, the Torah doesn't tell us what to do, a lesson or a tzivah what to do. Was on them wollten es nicht gewusst, meaning that if he wouldn't tell us, he wouldn't know. There's nothing there. The Torah did sell the protest of Baruch wie Moshe Rabbeinu or the alle Tzavuim von Eibishten wegen Melechus HaMishkan begeben zu reden. All it tells us, facts. It's a story. The tzivui to do, that's in Parsha Trumat Tzav. You got to do this, you got to do that. Now, when the Torah repeats it all, he's not repeating a tzivui. We don't have another tzivui in these parshas. All it's repeating is a fact. He's telling us a story. This is what they did. This is what they did. Moshe told him this. It's also, it repeats what Moshe said. As far as we know, the tzivui is known from previous parshas. It just tells us a fact. Moshe told him this and this and this. And then it says that they did this and this and this. Das heißt, as is eine Naine von Sicha. So what's written in parshas by Yaakov Pekudei is not called Torah in simple pshat. It's called Sicha. It's out. Chelik of Torah, versteht sich, but Torah, tzivui, this is not a tzivui. This is just telling us a Sicha, which we said before, Sicha Dibur means stating facts, nothing with heroes. We bald that the Sicha b'negei the Mishkan, and since this is a Sicha concerning the Mishkan, is das azay chaviv, it's so beloved, that soledem kum di arichas b'chol haprotim ha'neifim from kfula b'Torah. That's what the Torah repeats it, and all the details. Because something that you love, you repeat. And sometimes it could be Sicha that you love. The Torah will repeat more than he will repeat other things. And this, b'meila, we have a raya from that Rashi. Rashi says that Yofer sichos l'shalavdo and trotzin shalbonim. And we ask the Shaila, the Chura is mashma that by the Torah bonim we don't find it. That's not what he's saying. Rashi is saying that sometimes sicha is such a important thing, even though it's not a hero, more important than sometimes a inyan of a hero. Not, I wouldn't say important, more chaviv. And that's exactly what happened here. In Parsha Yaakov Pekudei, there's no sivui there. It's only telling us what happened, what Moshe said and what they did. That's sicha, and that is more chaviv. And the Torah repeats it. So Rashi doesn't have to tell us the reason. We understand it from before. That sometimes when the Torah tells us a story, something that happened is repeated because it's more chaviv. And here it's more chaviv. Alpizeh is moving what Rashi brings to Parsha Chayisora Rabbi Shem from Balamayim Rebacher. This will also explain why Rashi in Parshas Chayisora, where he says the statement of Rebacher, Yofes Chosin Shalbonim, Shalabde Yofes Mitrosin Shalbonim, and Rashi brings who said it. Now, Rashi, we learned many times in the Rebbe Sichas that Rashi does not usually bring a name when he quotes a statement of Pshat and Apostle, even though it comes from a Medrash, but it's only in the Geya to Pshat. That's why Rashi brings that. But he usually does not bring the name of who said it, whatever the reason shall be. And the Rebbe has a squall that if Rashi does bring the name, it's because it adds something in the Pshat, knowing who said it. But usually it'll be, if you know that he said it, find out if something else he said, and that will explain more Pshat and Posik. But Dosis Kimduber Kama Pomim, the reason Rashi brings the name, like I said many times, so them was the name from Bala Memre, Gitzo Ateisus Bir and Navanas Apirish. By mentioning the name, it will make extra understanding in the Pshat that Rashi says. So here also, by writing that who said the statement that Sichos and Shalav Yoves is Yofe and the Rosh Shalbonim, said Reb Ache, by mentioning that Reb Ache said that Vet Mavuya the Teichen from Maimer Yofe Sichos and Shalav Yoves, this gives an insight into the meaning of his statement that he said, as the Adgoshe is not in the Yisra from the Avdei Yoves like Ababonim nor in the Meile from Sicha. That will prove, the Rebbe says, what he said before, that Rashi's stress is not the Maila of the Avdei Ovis over the Bonim, but the Maila over Sicha, sometimes Sicha over Torah. And we'll see it, in order to stress that point, Rashi brings Ravacha. And also through understanding what he says, knowing that it was Ravacha said this, we'll see how is it possible. The Taka sometimes Sicha should be more than Torah. First of all, how do we know that's the stress, not the Avdei Ovis versus Bonim? But also, what's Taka the Svara? Why would sometimes Sicha, which is not a Hiroah, why would that be Yofer more Choviv than Torah? So we have to find what else did Ravacha say. In Sichta Yuma Gebrach de Braise, in Yuma it says a Braise like this. Ton Rabbanon. Rabbanon learned. V'dibarta bom, it says in Krishma, V'dibarta bom. Speak in them. What's them? Divrei Torah. So the Chazal Darshan, bom v'lei b'tfilah. Main words speak them, but not in davening. In other words, you don't daven all day. V'dibarta bom, it says also another union. Speak them. Bom yesh l'cheshus l'daber v'lei d'varim acherim. You only have a right to speak them, Torah. You have no right to speak anything else. The Ba'achim, here the word that Ravacha says, a different pshat. The Dibarta bom asei sim kvav al tasamara. It says, speak Torah, make Torah a permanent thing, kavua, and don't make it temporary. That's what Dibarta bom means. You should get involved deeply. This should be kavua by you. Was the chura from them was Ravacha zok nor dem chiyuv and the shlila b'negei divrei Torah. You see what Ravacha did. He says that the posik with Dibarta bom tells us something about Torah. What you should do with Torah. The positive and the negative. You should always have Torah kavua. The Torah should not be by you in a temporary way. I say esim kvav al tasamara, make him kavua, make him set, don't make him temporary. According to his chart, he doesn't mention that you should speak Torah and not other things. Via zog sein bal pluk to part them, like the other one is arguing when he says, "V'dibarta bom v'leib dvarim acherim." What does the first opinion say? V'dibarta bom should speak them Torah and not other things. Don't speak about other things. Ravacha didn't mention that. Ravacha says, speak them, make them kavah, and don't make them aray. But he didn't mention anything about not speaking other things. His mashma seems, about dvarim acherim is reit levacha nit chal di shlila. In mashma, according to Ravacha, there's nothing wrong. I mean, there's nothing negative about speaking other things. The first opinion says don't speak other things, and he didn't say don't speak other things. He just says make Torah kva, don't make Torah aray, but nothing other things. So it seems like Ravacha says there's nothing wrong in speaking other things. Oh, but see, then can we sagen as das Ravacha is a heter that dorim acherim betelim? Can we say that Ravacha holds that there is a heter to speak dorim betelim, to speak other things which are stupid? So he says the pasuk is not telling you that you can't speak other things, which means he holds he could speak. There's a heter to speak dorim betelim can be. But the beer in them is the pshat is like this. Ravacha is madgish as when the geilu divrei Torah. Ravacha stresses when it comes to Torah is a chiyuv tmidi ubehechler as a darb zayin v'dibarta bom. By Torah, there is a complete commandment. There's a complete obligation that it always and for sure you have to make him constantly speak them kavua unitar, and they have to be kavua, set, and not temporary. When it comes to other things, you can't say very clearly you can't speak any other things. See, the other time it says you can't speak anything else. Ravacha didn't say that. He can't say there's nothing else you could speak. Because sometimes there are other things which is not in the gather of Torah, and you should speak him. He does need. Other things that we're talking about is not Dvarim B'Teilim. You can have other things which is not Dvarim B'Teilim, but it's not Torah. That doesn't mean it's not part of Torah. It means it's not commandments, it's not lessons that we give in dinim that shaykhs and anything that shaykhs to it, nor diburim, the sipurim, vinyona yisayres, their talks, their stories, their inspiration. So they're good to speak. So Ravacha didn't say you can't speak anything else. Torah has to be always. These things don't have to be always. But sometimes b'meila ken zayin. Sometimes it's possible. It could be azasicha eich yofe bis azasicha v'svet zayofe miterosan. You could have a talk about other things, and it's yofe. It's good, and it's sometimes even better than Torah. That's right. And the stress is not avdei ovis versus bonim. It's sicha versus Torah. So the other things could be even greater amal than Torah. Aber von deswegen ist Dafke, wenn Teire, der Zivi Aseis und Qual Tasamare. What he says, Teire, you always have to have. Teire, even though sometimes Sicha is greater, but the Kavua in the person's heart and mind has to be always Teire, and it shouldn't be temporary. For him, it's selbstverständlich, it's self-understood. Even for a child of 5. As men muss allemal gedenken, you always have to remember. You have to review and speak and learn. You always have to have in mind everything that you have to do. What you must do, what you're not allowed to do. So this is what he said. The Torah is telling you that Torah you always have to have. Other things, not always. Now, not what I'm telling, which is usher, but there could be other things which sometimes you have to have it, and sometimes when you have to have it, it's even more important than Torah, which is the gear to Chassidim that we sometimes have verbringen, or you tell Sipurim of Tzadikim, instead of sitting and learning. And then it's not Torah. We tell a story of a Tzadik. It's a story of a Tzadik. It's not Dvarim B'Teilim, but it's not a tzivur what to do. Nevertheless, it gives a person a seder. So sometimes that could be greater than Divrei Torah. And when you have to do it, you have to do it. So from these words, we understand what Ravacha meant. Since here Ravacha says, B'negei Torah, it's not Sheila that you can't have other things other than Torah. He says it's possible. Torah always has to be. The other thing is Ladavka always. But from that we understand that it's possible sometimes that the other things which are also important could be sometimes more important than Torah, more Chaviv. So when Ravacha said that over there in Parsha Chaisoro, by seeing what Ravacha said in Masechta Yuma, we understand what he meant here, that the whole point is Sicha sometimes is more important than Torah. And B'meila, from that, the Rebbe says, so Rashi already told us that sometimes Sicha is more important than Torah, and that's why it repeats it. So by us also, when it repeats the Mishkan in Parsha Yaakov Pekudei is Sicha. It's not Torah, which means it's not a lesson what to do. We know what to do. Moshe knew, heard from David. It's telling us what. So if it's something that's very Chaviv, so sometimes you go through the Sicha again and again and again because it's Chaviv. The Bir B'Zebepnim is Senyonim. Explain this in Chassidus. In the zwei Sedres, was when Nibir gechazet alle Prota Mishkan v'Kelev, and dort zwei Nekudas Kolis. The two Sedres where the Torah repeats all the details of the Mishkan and the Kelim. There are two general points. Number one, it talks about the Nidivas Halef and Eden, the Nidivas, the donation, the feeling of the heart that the Eden had, was Zeam Gebracht, ubizrisus achik delo, alle nötige Sachen for a Mishkan. Tells us how the Eden had such a great feeling to it, and that made them come and very fast to bring all the things that you need for the Mishkan. In a nation for Nidivas Halef, their heart had a Nidivas, I don't know how you say in English the word Nidivas, a feeling. They had to make an announcement, don't bring anymore. They brought so much that it was left over. So the Torah tells us about the Nidivas Halev, the feeling of the heart of the Yidden. And that's basically what it says, one of the things it says in these two parts of Yaakov Pekudei. Second thing is, the Chachmei Leib, the Chachmei Leib, fulfilled Hashem's commandment. They made the Mishkan, everything the way Hashem commanded. The way Hashem commanded, and who did he command it to Moshe? So the Torah makes sure that we see that they made it exactly as the Eibishter told Moshe. So we have two things here. One is the Nidivas Halev, the feeling of the heart. That's what the Eden did. And then we have the Maaseh, the actual doing. That the Torah tells us that the Chachamim, the Tzalal and the Chachamim, the experts, they did what the Eibishter said. The Proteus Yosef, we go more in detail. We see a combination between the two. So far, we said two separate things. One is showing the feeling of the heart, that we see B'Negeya, the Yidden who had this feeling of bringing the Doves, etc., etc. Another Inyan, which is the actual doing. That's the second thing, that's from the Chachma Leib. But Rebbe says, each one is made up of the other. Also, by bringing the Nedovas that Eden brought, they fulfilled a commandment, the Dugmas Evet from the Meibishn. It's not only that they had shows their feeling, it shows their feeling plus their action. They did what the Eibishter wanted. The Eibishter said, take Truma, take a donation from anybody whose heart will be menadev. Take Truma. So we see that even the first part, which shows in the Nidivas Halev the Eden, is connected to listening to the Eibishter and doing what the Eibishter said. Now, there is a by the Melocha from Chach Kol Chach Leib. The second thing, which we said, we see the guys, the Chachamim did everything. The Maise is given Nosei Libe. There also says Nosei Libe. The heart made them work, and they had this feeling in the heart when they worked. So we have these two milas. We have the mile of the feeling. We have the mile of the doing, and each one of these two has both milas. Is moving in them. We said before, Loshen is Yofe Sichoson Shel Avdei Ovis, that the Sicha, the speech of the Avodim of Avdei Ovis, is greater and sometimes better, nicer than the Torah of the Bonim. And the Rebbe said the Ikek stress is not the Avdei Ovis. This says sometimes Sicha is great in Pshat, Sicha is greater than Torah. But now the Rebbe Al-Pichsidis says there's two inyonim here. There's Sicha and Sicha of Avdei Ovis. There is a Maila in Avdei Ovis. Before we said, forget, Avdei is not a Maila. It's just even if though they're Avdei Ovis, but if it's an important Sicha, it's even greater than the Teras Kavonim. But Al-Pichsidis, yes, there is a Maila in Sicha, and there's a Maila in Avdei Ovis. Avdei Ovis means that you have Kabbalah sale. You're doing what the Eibishter wants. Sicha is Verboten mit dem Leib. When you say the word Sicha, it has to do with the feeling of the heart. How does Sicha have to do with the feeling of the heart? For Sicha is of the Inyan HaTfilah. The Chal Sicha goes on davening. K'mayim Razal, Chazal say, Ein Sicha el Tfilah. When it says Sicha, it means davening. And davening, Tfilah is the Chaveda Shevalev, the way of the heart. So when it says there's a concept of Sicha that has to do with the heart. When Eved is Madgish, the meaning from Kiyama Mitzvahs. Eved is a slave, servant that does. For him, das ist doch Teichel in Eved. That's the idea of an Eved. Mekayim sein Sivi Odin, to do what the master wants him to do. But those are the zwei Inyonim. This is the two Inyonim here. Nidvas HaMishkan, the Dovas the Eden gave, is Nidvas HaLef Eden, is in the Dov of the heart, that part. That's the Inyan of Sicha, which we said is the Inyan of Leib. And the Kiyam Atzivu for Nasiyas HaMishkan is Eved. And when they did the Mishkan, it's Eved. But the truth is, they both are combined also. Each one had, the first one also had the Inyan of Eved, and the second one also had the Inyan of Leib. But mainly the first one had the Inyan of Leib, which is the Inyan of Sicha. And it had also the Inyan of, in this Inyan, the Inyan of the Eved. So when it says, Yofes Sichos and Shlav de Yovis, and we want to connect it to this case here, why it repeats. Yes, it's not only the, Al-Pichsid, not only the Sicha fits here, that this is similar to the Sicha over there, which is Choviv, and that's why he repeats it. Even the Avdei Ovis part is here. They are the Avodim, because there's the Inyan of Maise. And there's Darv Zayin, the Iskalles from the Beide. What has to be, you have to have Sicha of Avdei Ovis. As the Kiyama Mitzvahs, which is the Inyan of Eved, doing the Mitzvah, which is the Eved, Darv Zayin zusammen mit Nidivas HaLeib, also has to have, you have to have Nidivas HaLeib, that your heart should be involved. And in them, Nidivas HaLeib, there's a Chonen, Adas is Mitzatziv HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When you have the Nidivas HaLeib, you have to feel that this is a Tzivah of Deibishter, David. And when you do the Maisa like they did, you have to do the Maisa, which is the Tzivah of Deibishter, like an Eved, also with the feeling of the heart. Now here in order 43, the Rebbe says, based on this, this you can explain Rasha, but not in Pshat, in Chassidus. Rasha writes that he's not repeating his commentary on all the details because he wrote it before already. So Rasha writes, Kvar pirashti nidvas hamishkan umalachte b'mokem tzavasom, that I already said about the nidoves of the Mishkan in the place where the Torah commanded to do it. And Rasha writes this in the Dibur HaMaschal Nediv Libe. What's the heading of Rasha? The Div Libe. And those words, Rasha says that I already explained the nidvas hamishkan, what it accomplished b'mokem tzavasom, because he wants to say nidvas hamishkan umalachte, because the nidvas of the Mishkan and the Meloche madgish beikech chdivis hasicha nediv Leib. It stresses the main thing, sicha, which we said before. Sicha is nediv Leib. Sicha is like tefillah, and that's nediv Leib. That's what Rasha writes is on nediv Leib. But that's al pnimis inyan what Rasha writes it. But the simple answer, the kitzur, the answer to the kasha, why does the Torah repeat? Because something that's chaviv you repeat, and we see that begashmi. Something that you love, you repeat it again, and you say it again, and you say it again. Same thing with Eibush, they set it over, and the most important thing is the Mishkan. Therefore, the only Mishkan repeats again, and Rasha doesn't have to write it because we know it already from the previous Rasha that he repeats what Eliezer did, even though it's Sicha, and that's something that's very important, and because he loves it, that's why it's so important, and he repeats it again. Same thing here too. Okay.
So the Rebbe does explain it through the Rashi of Evet. Sichos Nishal Evet. That's the key to the whole Sicha.
He is that we should, if Rasha wouldn't have said it over there,
yeah,
anyway, but Rasha would have to write it here.
Right, that's right.
Like every Rasha writes what he's trying to tell you. It doesn't rely that you'll understand yourself. But any place where it's already understood from before, Rasha doesn't have to repeat it. And Rasha assumes that the Talmud is about it has a zikaron and remembers everything you learned. He remembers that there because it's so special. Chaviv, he repeats it. Oh, so here too. Say the same answer but he gave in the seam. Why the thing repeats 12 times.
Repeats itself, yeah.
But also you could say, this is the Chanukas HaMizbeach. This is the foundation of the Mishkan. So it's something Abisha loves. So you repeat it every time. Yeah.
Shkoyach.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.